Hey guys, welcome or welcome back to Michelle's STEM Journey. I am Michelle and I'm here today with the fifth video in the series Swift and Xcode. In today's video, we will be exploring functions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to video 5 in the series Swift and Xcode. So today we will be looking at functions. So a function is a self-contained block of code that performs a specific task. They are defined with a name, and it can accept parameters, and it can return a value. So we declare a function using the word func. Then we name the function, usually with the name that describes what the function does, and then we will add an open and closing parentheses. And then it is followed by an open and closing curly brackets, and in between those curly brackets, we will put the lines of code that we want in the function. And so these open and closing parentheses right here, right after the name of the function, that is actually used to add parameters later on, and we will learn about that later, but we can first go to Replit to practice. Okay, so first we can define a function. So remember that we use the keyword func, and then we can add our function name. I'm going to call it weather. And then the syntax here is very important. So open and closing parentheses, and then an open curly bracket, and then enter. And then we can write the line of code. In this case, I'm just going to let it print out the string. Today is sunny. Okay, and then we can run it, and we will see that nothing pops up. And you guys can think ahead and try to figure out what seems to be the problem, but we can go back. And let's learn about calling a function. So we have already declared a function and written some code in it. So the computer has stored that information. However, to execute the code in the function, we will need to call it. To do this, we simply just write out the function name. In this example, the console will print out hello everyone. And so that was exactly what you needed to do to solve the problem that we just encountered. So as I already said, the computer has already stored the information inside the function. So when we put print hello everyone inside this function, the program already stored it, but we needed to call the function. Once we call the function, the program will know that we want to execute what was in the function. So if we hit run, then the program will print out hello everyone. So let's just add that. We can add it right here, and I'm just going to put weather. And then don't forget the open and closing parentheses. So the open and closing parentheses will always follow the function name, because as I said, it is used for later on when you want to add parameters or arguments. But these open and curly brackets, those are only for when you want to define a function, because those indicate that in between those open curly brackets, you put lines of code within the function. And now once I ran it, it printed out the string today is sunny, which is exactly what we wanted it to print out. Okay, so since I've talked about parameters and arguments so much, let's learn about those. So parameters are stated when declaring a function. They act as placeholders for the values that will be passed to the function when it is called. They are local to the function and only accessible within the function's body. However, arguments are stated when calling a function. They are the actual values passed to the function. The values passed in will substitute the places where the parameter is located. So this might seem a little confusing at first, but we can see an example of a parameter on this page. So in this example, we have the parameter name : string. Therefore, when we pass in an argument later on, it will take the place of the string and actually print out the name that was passed in. So here the parentheses have played a role. So inside it, we put name and then colon and then string with an uppercase S. The string indicates what data type that the function is expecting. And then so later on, when we pass in an argument, if we put in an integer, it will give us an error because the program was expecting a string. And then here you see that inside the print command here, I did not put hello everyone. Instead, I used string interpolation that we learned in one of the previous videos in the series. So you guys can go check that out. But here, instead of actually using hello everyone, I put hello and then name. And this is because when we look at the arguments, so using the example on the previous slide, I called the function and passed in an argument, name colon Michelle. And I'm missing a set of closing quotes here, but that is the string that was passed in. If we run the program, it should print out hello Michelle in the console. So here, because I did not put hello everyone and I used this instead, this was the parameter, and this part right here would be the argument. So I still called the function greet, and then within those parentheses I put name equals, instead of string I put Michelle. And this is because this is, as I said, is kind of the parameters are acting like a placeholder. So it is letting the computer know that we have something that will be passed in called name, and the name will have a data type of a string. And so later on in the argument, when we pass it in, I put name colon and then I added the string that I wanted to pass in, which is Michelle. Okay, so let's practice really quickly. So I closed out the previous functions and then I'm going to add the same one here, but I'm still going to put weather, and then for the parameters here I am going to put I put weather colon string and then open curly brackets, and then don't forget we need the closed one here. And then I'm still going to print out the string today is, and then instead of sunny, I'm going to put a backslash, parentheses, and then weather. And so, as I said, it kind of like acts like a placeholder. And then for the argument, I'm going to call this function. And then for the weather, instead of a string, I'm going to put cloudy. And then once I ran it, it said today is cloudy. But then if I put in an integer here, for example, I'm going to put 10, it will give us an error because we specified that the argument later on would be a string, but here we put in an integer, so it gave us an error. So as long as we make sure that the data types are matching, then everything should be good to go. Okay, let's talk about returning it. So in the previous examples, we've only printed out the values in a function. However, in the future, we might need to return a value and use them somewhere else. To implement a return, we can use the return keyword. There are two things to remember: specify the return value and then use the keyword. So in this example here, I have a function and it's called add. And then the parameters here are a, which would be an integer, and then b, which would also be an integer. And then here there is this arrow and it points to int, and then open and closing curly brackets. And in between those I have let sum equal to a plus b. And so let, we are setting a constant here, and sum is equal to a, which is one of the numbers that we have passed in later on, and then b, which is the other number. And then here we used the return value and we returned sum. So as I said here, we specified the return value. In this case, it is an integer. Okay, so let's look at this. So remember that one function can only output one return, and then all of the code after the return will not be executed. So here we have what we just saw, and then I put variable and I call it lucky number is equal to add, which is the function, and then within those parentheses it is calling for the this would be the arguments that calls for these parameters. So A would be 3 and then B is 5. And then I printed out lucky number. And so in this case, it should return what 3 plus 5 is. So if you see here, we didn't even use print, but once we run this, it will print out 8. And this is because it returned what? Because it returned sum, and sum was letting A plus B. And then, so the type of the value returned by the function must match the return type specified in the function definition. So here we specify that it must be an int. So once we returned it, it was 8, which is an integer. And then remember that we return a value so that it can be reused in other contexts. For example, we can store the output of the function call into another variable. So if we use print, then you cannot really utilize what was printed out later on in the program. However, if you see here, I labeled lucky number as a variable, and then I called the function, which the function, once you call it, it will return the sum of whatever numbers was passed in. And so lucky number is going to store that sum. And so later on, if you want to reuse the function by adding in new numbers instead of 3 and 5, you can always still use this because it is always going to be updated and it's going to return the sum instead of, if we were to print out the sum, then you could only use 3 and 5 because the printing out the sum, you can't really reuse it in other contexts. And then don't forget that we can write conditionals into a function as well. So here we have a function called check number, and then the parameter was that the number must be an integer. And then so if the number is greater than 0, then it will print out the number is positive, else if the number is less than 0, it will print out the number is negative, else it will print out the number is 0. And so be careful with the syntaxes here. This open curly bracket and this curly bracket indicates the function start and end, and then inside these open and closing curly brackets, those indicate each if statement, and then else if statement has its own, and then else statement has its own. So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something about functions. And so I would just like to kind of like sum it all up. So functions, we use functions because, for example, in this example, if we were to want to use this code over and over again, we obviously don't want to rewrite all of this if, else if, and else lines of code over and over again. So all we have to do is just use check number. And so calling and using functions make everything just so much neater as well as more convenient. And so yeah, that is the end of today's video, and I will see you in next week's video.